Hi, everybody. Welcome to Healing the Trauma Within. In this session, I am talking with Heather Natoli, and we're going to be talking about releasing trauma from the body. Let me tell you about Heather. She is a homeopathic consultant and trauma-informed facial, is it facial or fascial? I think fascial therapist. She works primarily with clients to break toxic patterns in body and soul to feel healthier in their bodies and more fulfilled lives. For the past 13 years, she has been raising her 4 children and supporting holistic families all around the world. Today, she's a thought leader on trauma patterns in the body, a teacher of homeopathic foundations for practitioners, and a holistic fascial body worker committed to empowering each client to heal for good and find their purpose. So welcome, Heather.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, it's nice to have you here. And I should have known that word was fascial because we're going to be talking about the fascia today. And how trauma gets stuck in our bodies and in our cells and all of that good stuff. So let's start out with, I think, where exactly does trauma get stuck in our bodies?
So I think a good introduction is starting with what is fascia, right? Because especially we all know that we can store stress and emotions in our bodies, right? We feel it in our shoulders as we're getting stressed and they clench up, or in our chest when we have anxiety. But what we're realizing is that our body has this fascial system that is this intercellular membrane. It actually weaves between every layer of the muscles, all beneath our skin. It's almost like this bodysuit that covers every layer of our whole system. And it's a sensory organ. It actually takes in all of the input of our exterior lives, the temperature, our emotions, the energy that comes towards us. And it tells our nervous system what to tell our body to do. So when we have trauma, when we have stressors coming out of us, it stores in our fascial system. And I find that often it stores in different parts of our fascial system, depending on what type of stressor it is.
Interesting. I did not know that fascia was a sensory organ.
Yes.
That's really interesting. I mean, I've heard about fascia before. I know about like fascia blasters and stuff like that, which I think we'll probably touch on here in a bit. So, I know that trauma is stored, like you said, it's stored in the fascia, but I always thought that trauma was stored pretty much everywhere in our bodies, like, in every cell. Am I wrong?
Well, not really, because fascia covers every cell of our body. So every muscle is weaved down into these little muscle bundles. And then every muscle bundle has little strands of muscle. And throughout each parts of those is these fascial layers just binding all of it. And the fascia weaves itself around even down to every cell of the body and inserts itself into each cell's DNA. So it is literally throughout your system, right? It covers each organ, so it doesn't go through each organ, but it has a lot of control over how our bodies are affected.
Right. And, let's talk about some of the ways our bodies are affected. It causes a lot of dis-ease in our bodies.
Yeah. And I actually believe that, a lot of times people feel unheard when they're saying, I have this feeling in my body, right? I feel like I have this heavy pressure on my chest, but then they go to see a doctor and they're like, but your tests are all coming back fine, right? And we see it all the time in holistic practices where we're like, oh, but you have that feeling, so let's go with it. Let's figure it out, right? And years from then something will come up on the tests, right? And what we're not seeing is that we're just learning about fascia. Medicine is just learning and understanding fascia, so we don't have testing for it yet. So there's these, that first layer where we can feel it. We know that there's this tension in our chest, but it's not going to show up on any testing because we don't have fascial tests yet.
Gotcha. Okay. But, I know that storing the trauma and storing stress and all of that in our body can cause like autoimmune disorders and cancer, diabetes, all of that stuff. that we definitely don't want. So let's talk about getting rid of it. How do we start getting it out of our bodies? Because
Yeah.
it's poison, basically.
Yeah, it's so important. And I feel like one of the reasons that those things have all increased so much is because our lives have become so sedentary. And one of the ways that our fascial system detoxes is through movement. So, one of the practices that I have in office is to help bodies start moving into new positions that they've forgotten that they're able to move through. Right. So often we're working in front of us, our limbs move straight forward and backward when we're walking, when we're sitting, right? We're only moving through these planes. And so we're not allowing the rest of our fascial body to experience the movement and detoxification that it needs to. So when we start to bring in new movements and reawaken those spots, our body naturally releases, right? So sometimes, right, if you go to a dance class or you start moving your body in a new way, sometimes emotional stuff will come up,
Mm-hmm.
right? Sometimes when you have a massage session, emotional stuff comes up, right? And afterwards, you might feel a lot of the anger. And that's because it's something that was trapped and stored in our body and not moved properly. So, one of the biggest things for moving that stuff out is literally moving.
Okay.
So, I have 4 kids, right? And when we wake up in the morning, we do something called a fascial shake. So we wake up and we just try to shake and move our bodies in all different ways. We turn on a bit of music and we are literally bouncing. Rebounding is a really great way to move things, especially on a harder surface. So you don't even need a trampoline. And allowing that kind of shock wave to move through your body is actually sending vibrations through all of your fascial system and allowing things to start reprogramming and rebooting and detoxing the way that they need to.
So just kind of jumping in place on a hard surface.
Yeah, jump roping, even some running or fast-paced walking, but we like to do a fascial shake because fascia really likes unorganized and chaotic movement.
Well, and with kids, it's fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a great way to get them started with giggles and happy moods.
Yeah, and for all of us.
Yeah, exactly. So what are some other ways? I mean, yeah, how often do we just throw off our hats and be silly?
Right.
And that's kind of what we're doing, is moving in different ways, and we're kind of being silly, but it has a very important effect on our bodies.
Yeah. And just listening to our bodies of what they need, right? I always say when we wake up in the morning, often we wake up curled into a fascial pattern that our body is seeking, right? But you wake up and you instantly jump out of it because you're like, oh my God, why am I sleeping like that? Or you go to stretch and you're like, oh, that looks weird, right? I don't want any of my family members coming in and seeing me stretching in this silly position, right? I encourage everybody to really fold into the position that your body is wanting, right? Really stretch, just like an animal. Animals wake up and they go into all of these different sorts of stretching and motions because it's needed, right? Because it's needed to stretch and reprogram that fascial system that's so connected to our mental and emotional bodies.
Well, and who doesn't love a stretch? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
There's
feels
nothing like
so
a good
good.
stretch. You just all of a sudden stop. I'll be like doing something. It's like, oh nope, stretch, gotta stop.
Yeah.
It does. It feels so good. So, what are some other ways that we can, start blasting? Well, let's talk about the fascia blaster. Blasting the trauma out of our bodies, basically.
Yes. Yeah. And one thing that I want to say about fascia blasters, because I have one for myself. I love them, but you need to use them with caution, because one thing about fascia is that it's controlling and informing our nervous system. So when fascia feels assaulted, when it feels like you're coming on too strong, it's going to actually do the opposite thing that we're looking for. It's going to tell our nervous system to freeze up, to make all of our muscles really tense, right? So even though it's breaking through a lot of the fascial adhesions and sometimes getting rid of the cellulite that we're looking to move through, right? And releasing things on that level, it can sometimes start programming this sympathetic nervous response, where then we're pushing ourselves into a fight or flight state. So what I like to do with the fascial blaster is actually move really slowly, right? So moving slowly on parts until we find a space that you can feel, right? Sometimes you get to a spot and you're like, "Ooh, I can feel that one," right?
Right.
Nerve fascia is super innervated. So you can feel almost like a burning, tingling, sometimes shooting pains from spots. Those are the spots that you want to sit with. So then I like to take that fascia blaster and kind of just gently press or gently move and try to get the body to understand that it's safe to release, right? Especially as a trauma informed approach, we want to create safety before we start releasing stuff. Right?
Always.
That's really, really important. And even when we're working on ourselves. Right. So
Yeah. No, go ahead.
yeah, so fascia blasters are wonderful. They're really great. They're awesome tools, but I feel like we need to create awareness around how fascia responds, because it's really important that we're protecting ourselves from the re-traumatization process.
Okay, that makes sense. I was introduced to fascia blasters when I was caretaking for my stepmom, and um, she'd had a stroke, and she's basically a paraplegic. She can't walk, but she can stand for a short amount of time. So we were using, and this was based on a recommendation from our personal trainer at the gym.
Mhm.
We would use it on her legs to kind of loosen up the tone, because her muscles and stuff were very
So
rigid
tight.
and tight, and so we would
Yeah.
use it to loosen it up, and it made a huge difference in her ability to be able to stand and to be able to even just pick one foot up and put it down.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. It's
um,
incredible.
it's an incredible little tool, and you can find them on Amazon. They're not very expensive.
Yeah.
So, what about, does nutrition and hydration have anything to do with this? I talk a lot about that because I know that it's very important for our bodies, but how does
Yeah.
that interact with our fascia?
Yeah. So fascia is a water dense matrix, right? So it's really important that it's hydrated. There's a really good book called Quench that I've been reading that tells you how to actually hydrate your system in a way that is helpful, right? Because so many of us take in a lot of water that doesn't have the minerals and electrolytes that we need, and it just flushes through our system and actually depletes us of minerals because it accidentally picks up some stuff on the way, right? And our fascial system is a mechanical system. So when we're taking in these waters that are filled with electrolytes and minerals and good for our body actually needs to, again, create movements to flush our fascial system with the water. So it's really important to hydrate with something that has a lot of minerals. And we can say that we eat a lot of our water, right? A lot of our hydration can come from fruits and veggies that are wonderfully nutritious for our body and really, really good for our fascial system, but especially when we're moving it through. So even on rest days, if you're somebody who's working out and then taking a rest day, you want to get up and go for a little bit of a walk, do some gentle stretching, right? Do that fascial shake in the morning. That's not too stressful on your body, but allows the fluids to pump through your system, because they don't just move into your cells just because you're taking in the water.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, given our food system the way it is today, the soil and stuff is so depleted from minerals and everything. Do you have a recommendation on, what it is? Should we be adding minerals to our water? Is there a special type of water we should be drinking, or?
Yeah, we add minerals back into our water after we use a reverse osmosis filter
Okay.
to filter, because our water is pretty tainted, right? It has so much, from the runoff of pesticides to medications that have just been thrown away. There's so much that runs into our water system, and it's really hard to get rid of. So we personally use a system that really deeply purifies the water. And then we'll add back in some trace minerals. I really love using electrolyte waters, but you can even have a glass of orange juice, or right, that our food sources are so good, and put a little bit of sea salt on them, right? Things that come straight from nature,
Okay.
right? And even, our gardening, a lot of stuff just needs to kind of be reinvigorated. Our soils are
Right.
so depleted that gardening at home and adding in the minerals, right? Even like we need to be gardening with dead animals, right? We need that kind of stuff in our soil that naturally is just decomposing in our lands, right? That we've kind of like started this sterilization process, and we're eliminating key nutrients that should be growing into our foods that just aren't. So
Right.
I feel like, yeah, I'm just a advocate for getting out and doing the gardening yourself, and just being able to provide a soil that's nutritious for our food to grow in.
Yeah. And I know, listeners, it probably sounds like we've gone down a rabbit hole, but I know that everything that we've talked about today relates to getting that trauma out of your body. Right. So we
Yeah,
haven't
for
really,
sure.
I mean, we haven't really gone off track. It may feel like it just because it's like, well, what are we talking about nutrition and dead bodies or dead animals for, with trauma? I mean, come on now. All of this relates to trauma and
Yeah.
to releasing it from our systems.
Yeah, especially with our bodies, we need to make sure that we have a wholesome body, that we are able to start moving things through. The detoxification process can become toxic if we don't have a system that's able to detoxify properly. And that includes trauma release, right? Things that come up when we're doing, fascial work, body work, massage, movement therapies, right? Things come up. And if our bodies aren't clear and ready to express them, then they just resettle in different areas, and it actually can become toxic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Heather, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom and insight with us about this. I've definitely have learned some new things that I didn't know before. So
Oh,
that was
thank
fantastic.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And listeners, thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you in one of the next sessions.